Tectonic Processes and Hazards, Edexcel A-Level Geography, Inquiry Question 3, Podcast 1, Disaster Trends. Natural disasters kill on average 60,000 people per year globally. Globally, disasters were responsible for 0.1% of deaths over the past decade. Deaths from natural disasters have seen a large decline over the past century, from in some years millions of deaths per year to an average of 60,000 over the last decade. Historically, droughts and floods were the most fatal disaster events. Deaths from these events are now very low. The most deadly events tend to be earthquakes. Disasters affect those in poverty most heavily. High death tolls tend to be in LICs and NEEs, in countries where the infrastructure to protect and respond to these events is low. The number of deaths from natural disasters can be highly variable from year to year. Some years pass with very few deaths from before a large disaster event claims many lives. If we look at the average over the past decade, approximately 60,000 people globally died from natural disasters each year. This represents 0.1% of global deaths. What we see is that in many years the number of deaths can be very low, often less than 10,000, and accounting for as little as 0.01% of total global deaths. But we also see the devastating impact of shock events. The famine and drought in Ethiopia of 1983 to 85, the 2004 Indian Ocean earthquake and tsunami, and the 2010 Port-au-Prince earthquake in Haiti. All of these events pushed global disaster deaths over 200,000, more than 0.4% of global deaths in these years. Low-frequency, high-impact events such as earthquakes and tsunamis are not preventable, but such high losses of human life are. We know from historical data that the world has seen a significant reduction in disaster deaths through earlier prediction, more resilient infrastructure, emergency preparedness and response systems. Improving living standards, infrastructure and response systems in LICs and poorer regions will be key to preventing deaths from natural disasters in the coming decades. In the early to mid-20th century, the annual death toll from disasters was high, often reaching over 1 million per year. In recent decades, we have seen a substantial decline in deaths. In most years, fewer than 20,000 die, and in the most recent decades, this has been less than 10,000. Even in peak years with high-impact events, the death toll has not exceeded 500,000 since the mid-1960s. This decline is even more impressive when we consider the rate of population growth over this period. When we correct for population, showing this data in terms of death rates measured per 100,000 people, we see an even greater decline over the past century. From 1900 onwards, if we explore these categories, we see that historically earthquakes, floods and droughts could result in large number of deaths. Over the last few decades, most years with a high death toll tend to result from large earthquake events. The devastating impacts of drought, flood and earthquake events over the past become clear, but what we also observe is a significant decline in deaths from almost all types of disaster, with the exception of earthquakes and extreme weather. Human impacts from natural disasters are not fully captured in mortality rates. Injury, homelessness, and displacement can all have a significant impact on populations. Earthquake events occur across the world every year. The USGS, the US Geological Survey, tracks and reports global earthquakes with close to real-time updates. However, the earthquakes which occur most frequently are often too small to cause significant damage, whether to human life or in economic terms. Significant earthquakes are those which are large enough to cause notable damage. They must meet at least one of the following criteria: cause deaths, moderate damage of $1 million or more, a magnitude of 7.5 or greater, modified Mercalli intensity scale, MMI, of X or 10 or greater, or generated a tsunami. The number of people dying in natural disasters is lower today than it was in the past. The world has become more resilient. Earthquakes, however, can still claim a large number of lives. Whilst historically floods, droughts, and epidemics dominated disaster deaths, a high annual death toll now often results from a major earthquake and possibly a tsunami caused by them. Since 2000, the two peak years in annual death toll reaching hundreds of thousands was 2004 and 2010. Earthquake deaths accounted for 93% and 69% of such deaths respectively. In fact, both events, the Sumatra earthquake and tsunami of 2004 and the Port-au-Prince earthquake in 2010, are in the deadliest earthquake rankings. But how good are disaster statistics? There is neither a universally agreed definition of a disaster nor a universally agreed numerical threshold for a disaster designation. Reporting disaster impacts, especially deaths, is therefore controversial for a number of reasons. It depends on whether direct primary deaths or indirect secondary deaths from subsequent hazards or associated diseases are counted. If somebody dies a week or a month after an event, does that still count as a death due to the hazard? Location is significant because local or regional events in remote places are often under-recorded. Declaration of disaster deaths and casualties may be subject to political bias. The 2004 Asian Tsunami was completely ignored in Myanmar, but perhaps initially overstated in parts of Thailand, where foreign tourists were killed, and then played down to protect the Thai tourist industry. Statistics on major disasters are difficult to collect, particularly in remote rural areas of low-income countries. And time trend analysis, interpreting historical data to produce trends, is difficult. Much depends on the intervals selected and whether the means of data collection have remained constant. Trends, death numbers, affected economic impacts can be upset by a cluster of mega disasters, as happened in the 2004 Asian Tsunami or the 2011 Haiti earthquake.